put it, they sent us collapsed boxes, we put them on a pallet
What's that?
in boxes.
Yeah.
And then they eventually, when we got the records in the boxes, they sent a truck to pick them up. But it's having a place to stage it doesn't work very well. I mean, I'm not sure whether those trucks could get into, your
Right.
business necessarily.
Right.
Besides which, they tell you it's going to be on thus and thus certain day between, what was it, noon and 4. I'm not gonna sit around and wait for the truck
Right.
to come. But yeah,
Which is exactly how road management fails, right?
I'm trying to pawn more of them off on Goodwill now.
We ready? You wanna get this show on the road, Travis? Should we go, or we wait?
Yes, would you like this one up, or would you like the PowerPoint to follow?
Uh,
Do you have a preference?
I don't have a preference.
Just turn your mic on.
Yes, mic's on.
It's on. Okay, I call this Planning Commission public meeting to order at 7:04 p.m. Please take the time to make sure your phones are off and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. We're still doing the Pledge of Allegiance, aren't we? Okay.
We have it.
Pledge the allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, the role of the Planning Commission is to hold workshops to review and make recommendations to the City Council on all manner of policy and legislative activities. In some cases, we act as a quasi-judicial board for land use cases, which can then be appealed to either the council, the hearing examiner, or court. Can the clerk please take roll call?
Commissioner David Simpson,
Here.
Commissioner Sharon Watts,
Here?
Commissioner Robin Zorich,
Here.
Commissioner Brian Mattson.
Here. Okay, at this time, I ask that any member of the public who wishes to give testimony for items not on the agenda, please approach the microphone at this time. Do we have anybody?
Anybody online?
I don't see anybody. I would see it in the participants, right? I think it's just us. Did we have one? You gestured. No, we don't. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and talk about the agenda. Do we approve?
Motion to approve the agenda?
Second?
Okay. Motion passes. The agenda is approved. Do we have a motion for items on the consent agenda? That's next on my list here.
Yes, I move that we approve the consent items as presented.
Second.
Motion passes.
Then, don't take a vote, or see.
We
Yeah,
didn't
take a
actually
vote.
ask for a vote.
Should we, okay, shall we take a vote?
Yes.
Tell normally ask, is there anybody in opposition?
Is there anyone in opposition?
No.
No.
All right, motion passes. Okay, tonight we have a public hearing. It is the WLD-43-046 SEPA and rezone request. The description of the proposal is the applicant has proposed a zone change from highway commercial zoning to community commercial zoning. The proposal does not require a comprehensive plan amendment because the property is already designated as commercial under the current comprehensive plan. I'll hand it off to staff for the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The application before you today, as you noted, is a rezone. The property in question is identified by the red arrow on the presentation that's attached. It's the Woodland Shores RV Park. If you're familiar with exit 21 and the AM/PM behind it is A Street, which is A lot of people don't know it's there, but if you live in Woodland Shores, you're there all the time. So, as you mentioned, it is currently zoned Highway Commercial C2, and the site plan, shoreline conditional use permit, and shoreline substantial development permit was approved in 1993, and the permit number on that was W92-3. And at that time, the permits were reviewed by Cowlitz County, and it was approved for 59 spaces, and the site is generally consistent with the permits that were approved at that time. So I'm going to show you the aerial photograph of what it looks like, and you can see the site plan on the right. So it is generally consistent with what was approved back then. And technically on the in the record on the website, there, if you read it carefully, you'll see that there was an initial approval, then they went back for some minor changes. So it was amended, it was approved in 93 and then amended again in 93. So this site plan was the original approval, and it's slightly modified, but it's consistent with the modified plan that was approved. So Woodland Shores is requesting to be rezoned to Neighborhood Commercial C3, and the comprehensive plan designation is commercial, so there is no need to do a comprehensive plan designation change. A little bit of history here. WMC 17.72.100D governs RV camper parks, and specifically subsection 6 is about occupancy. And occupancy was limited to 30 consecutive days when this code was originally adopted in 1979. In July of 2019, Ordinance 1437 was amended to allow for 90 consecutive days of occupancy. They had requested year-round occupancy, but the council instead opted to go with 90 days. And later in August 2024, with Ordinance 1562, the code section was amended again to 180 days in the C3 zone. But it also pointed out that it allows for year-round occupancy in the C3 zone, so the neighborhood commercial zone. And that ordinance also made some changes because they recognize that there is some utility in allowing for longer occupancy, given that the predominant public input at that time was RV parks with year-round occupancy create a neighborhood atmosphere, and that the C3 neighborhood commercial zone might be appropriate in that case. So they did amend the C3 zoning in that ordinance by adding some additional information to the purpose statement, and specifically C3 is appropriate, so I'll read this entire purpose statement. The neighborhood commercial district is a zoning classification providing for commercial services which by necessity or convenience must locate in or near residential areas while minimizing any undesirable impacts of such uses on surrounding neighborhoods. So that was the original thinking. The part that was added in 2024 was neighborhood commercial areas should be located where they have access to local access streets in an area characterized by residential uses, or on local access streets that are not through streets, or where they do not require new direct access points to highways, arterials, or collectors, unless such access points are built to street intersection specifications. So this was due to the concern that the properties not necessarily create an unsafe or intersection issue, whereas a residential street would have a street intersection where it connects with a major circulator, as opposed to a commercial driveway that accessed a major street. So that kind of gave staff direction as to where is it appropriate to look at neighborhood commercial zones. So in this case, it is a local access street, a street. It is on an existing dead end, which again is a street. There's no direct access to a highway, arterial, or corrector. And access point is built to city standards in effect when the project was approved. So it is consistent with what they were looking for. In this case, commercial services, to deal with the first part, sorry, I may have just taken a slide out of order. Commercial services are provided in the area, so there are commercial services on A Street and State Route 503, plus additional streets that are in the area, such as B and CC Street, and Gorig, and also Atlantic on that side. The site would conveniently access these commercial activities. It continues to be a commercial use because it is in fact commercial use, and it is not a residential use. Testimony and history has shown that the site is not, it doesn't create an undesirable use in the neighborhood, since in fact it existed almost prior to all of the uses that are in the neighborhood. So yep, so I had read that first slide wrong, sorry about that. So comprehensive plans consistency, this is what I looked at in reviewing it. There is no change to the commercial designation, so it would be consistent with GMA because it is an existing use that was compliant. It's an existing use that was compliant when the GMA plan was adopted, and there are no proposed changes in operation of the site or use. The second criteria is criteria of significant creation of significant adverse impacts. In this case, the existing use was compliant when it was created and when the plan was adopted. No change in operation of the site is proposed, and no impacts will result as a result of the rezone. The third is, can the use be accommodated by existing city services and facilities? Again, no change in use, no change in intensity. It is an existing use served by existing city services and facilities, and there are no proposed change in operation that would change those conditions. And the last one is, helps implement the comprehensive plan goals and policies, and the argument is that it was an existing use and we have a GMA compliant plan, therefore the proposed use was compliant when we adopted our comprehensive plan. So there's no proposed change in operation or site that would lead me to believe that a rezone would make it or make the city non-compliant with GMA. So I have not drafted the ordinance language, but pending a recommendation by the Planning Commission today, I would draft an ordinance and a recommendation letter and pass it to the chair for review. And it would go to the next available city council meeting, which is May 5th, and it would be the, it would not be a public hearing, it would be a public meeting, an action item on that agenda. And staff's recommendation is approval.
Thank you. I want to just interject really quick. I skipped a step there because I don't do this very often. Does any member of the commission have any ex parte communication or conflicts of interest that we need to disclose?
No.
No. I don't either. I think it's important to follow the steps. Okay. Thank you, Travis. Does anyone have any questions for staff on their recommendation
I do.
or their presentation?
Maybe it's a housekeeping question, but that ordinance
62.
1562 hasn't been updated to code, is that?
It did update the code. It just hasn't updated the online version. So I attached the ordinance to the staff report and to the website. So the online code has not been updated.
Okay.
I don't know, Dave, if you were on the commission when the testimony was offered by the Woodland Shores people initially. Did you see that hearing by chance?
No, and like I say, that's just kind of a housekeeping thing to make
Right.
sure our recommendation going forward doesn't have any argument against it that
Dave.
So, another probably housekeeping thing, but how will we track, when we're looking at our unit counts and for our growth plans and things, how does this track in? Because we're basically taking what was once upon a time a vacation holiday snowbird kind of population and moving it into a year-round population that we have to plan for. How do we log these numbers into the plan?
That is a great question, and it's something we're going to have to think about. Technically, it is not considered a residential use, and they are considered transient housing, so they are not typically counted in the urban growth boundary or urban growth calculations. But it's kind of hard to ignore them.
Well, I'm just asking, how do we,
Yeah.
what, we have to do that?
Technically, there are no structures, so we can't count them. But one of the things we have to do this year with the comp plan update is break down our housing units into income bands. And it's unclear how we would do that in this case. But we also have a requirement for emergency housing, the provision of emergency housing. And so we may be able to count these as a potential emergency housing stock. So should there be, say, a house get burned, this is the type of housing that that a member of the community in distress might be able to rely upon to find a mobile home or an RV and move into a spot like this. So, but yeah, at this point,
So we're looking at the potential for kids that could be in school. We're having some sort of head count on a permanency level for fire and safety. You know, we just have to make them count,
yeah,
and we have to figure out how to do that. And I don't know how we do. I guess in like a regular mobile home park, everybody has a water meter and things, and they have their own unitized structure, but that's not the case here, so we should probably figure something out.
I also think that's a good question, Dave. That's not something I thought about when we were listening to the testimony. But one of the things that I did come away with from that evening is the residents that were testifying, they sure seemed like it was emergency housing for them. Right. That's the impression.
I believe that. I also know I have customers in my mini storage that live in their RV at Ocean Shores or someplace else, you know, Woodland Shores. But and that's their home. They decided to lighten their load and buy an RV and live in the RV, and that's their home. So
it raises an interesting question. First of all, should they pay impact fees, or should that be considered? Would they be vested because they existed before we adopted those? But if there's a unit turnover and a new tenant comes in and they have 2 kids, should impact fees be charged for those kids because they're not vested?
I think the impact fee ship has sailed, and you don't do that when somebody moves out of an apartment and somebody else moves into an apartment. So, I don't really think that's a concern at all. But in the same token, it's when we're trying to make sure we have facilities based on population, and that's part of the population. So that was just and I don't really want to slow this public hearing down over that, because that's actually stuff for other things we're doing tonight. But
Travis, I'd like to agree with Dave. I think that impact fees are so centered on the unit, right? And since the units are there already, I think that's pretty easy to justify why they'd be exempt. But that's just my opinion.
Does there's not gonna
If
be,
they were to add units, maybe that would be a.
there's not gonna be a building permit with this, and fees are collected at the building permit,
Right,
so.
right, yeah, I don't know where you.
I move to recommend to city council to approve this request.
So, I'm fine with that, that recommendation, but Travis, do we want to allow the applicant to present their case before we,
We can,
unless the applicant wants to skip doing, opt out of it?
I mean, we're happy to say thank you, and we're here to
It's-
answer.
so we can have a motion, and we can have it seconded, and then have discussion as well.
Okay, okay.
I second the motion.
Because we are gonna have to open and close the public hearing. It's been a while since I've done
I
that
haven't
too.
done this for a long time, so
So,
I can use all.
we can have it open for discussion still,
Okay.
and
Seconded. It's been seconded.
Okay,
Open it for discussion.
let's,
let's open it for a little discussion, and then, does anybody have any testimony you want to give?
No.
I don't either, to be honest. I tend to agree with you as far as your recommendation, but I don't know what I would add. Only that I think this fills a need, and it's a means to an end, and again, I found the testimony incredibly compelling.
Yeah, I thought so too.
Did you have any response? Should we open this up to the public? I don't see anybody else online. Does anybody else want to say anything? You can come up and have your say if you'd like.
I don't think there's.
Okay. All right. Okay, so I guess we'll close testimony on that. I don't have any need for any additional information, so shall we vote on the motion? Am I jumping too far ahead?
Nope.
No? All right, let's vote.
What's the motion?
Motion is to recommend to the city council approval of this zone change.
Okay.
Do you want to call it in?
Roll call.
Commissioner David Simpson,
Aye.
Commissioner Sharon Watts,
Aye.
Commissioner Brian Mattson,
Aye.
Commissioner Robin Zort.
Aye.
Okay. Do I use the gavel now, Travis? Is this when we do it? Okay, I close the public hearing. Thank you for your patience. Do you need any other guidance from us, Travis? Are you set? Are you locked and loaded and all that good stuff?
I will draft an ordinance and send you a recommendation letter tomorrow,
Okay.
or I guess Friday. So yeah, I should be able to get that done tomorrow.
You need me to just stop by and sign it at the offices, or?
Yeah.
Okay, will do.
Maybe we should plan on doing that Monday or Tuesday of next week. So
Okay.
we have technically we have 2 weeks, but I'll have that prepared probably Monday by the latest.
Okay, yeah, just get in touch with me. I'm just down the street.
Thank you.
All right. All right, so now we go back to staff for the presentation on the general, let's see, which periodic comp plan update, general discussion? Is that what we have next, Travis?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks for coming down.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
I hope Tel is watching this so he realizes how much he's needed to smooth this out. I don't see him, but.
Okay, so I would like to point out that we have a bunch of additional documents that are on the city's website for this effort. And I appreciate those of you who got back to me with some comments and discussions. So those made it into the updated spreadsheet. And I printed copies of that spreadsheet today, so you could follow along and as we go through the conversation today. But I'd like to point out that we received a copy of the housing chapter this morning, and that was posted on the website and emailed to all of you, the multiple documents that came with it. So just to clarify, we have, I have not, so I am responsible for reviewing and updating the introduction and community vision section, the public involvement chapter, so chapters 1 and chapter 2. On the website is a draft from SCJ for land use, that's chapter 3. Chapter 4 is housing. The draft is now on there for review. And chapter 5 is economic development, which is also updated by the consultant and on the webpage. The one chapter probably that's most important to most people, and that is chapter 6, the transportation chapter, that has not been submitted yet. Chapter 7 is there, Parks and Recreation. The draft has been updated, and we just updated the Park and Rec plan in 2023, so it required very, very little updating because it was just went through a public engagement process. So it's just a quick summary of what's in the Parks and Rec plan that was just updated. Chapter 8 has been updated by the consultant and is online. Chapter 9 is, and that's the capital facilities chapter. Chapter 9 is energy and utilities. It has been updated by the consultant and available online. And then chapter 10, which is the environment, is available up online after review by the consultant. And then the last one that they are working on is the growth management, just to document how we are consistent with the Growth Management Act. Now the new chapter, which is available online, and that is the climate resilience chapter, which we adopted in December of 2023. So at the start of 2024, that went into effect. And I've got copies of that for you today, so we could cover it, because I think Sharon and Brian might have been the only two who were on the council or the planning commission at that time. So we'll go over that. But I wanted to go back to Dave's questions. David brought up a question about what population are we looking at. So I gave you a PowerPoint presentation. It's a couple pages of the presentation that we looked at in 2023. And we looked at the various growth scenarios of what we were looking at. And Dave wanted to make sure that we were consistent with our other planning documents. And in 2016, the comprehensive plan took a 2.3% growth rate. Our sewer plan used a 2.3. Our 2020 water plan used a 2.3% growth rate. And the growth management plans at various times were 2.53, 3.54, and settled on a 3.5 using the Office of Financial Management population estimates. But in that second graph there, you see that they estimated 2.7, taking the average of the various ups and downs, busy years and slow years. And then on the third page, the third graph, you see how the Office of Financial Management plays out. So the black or the darker line at the bottom is our 2.3% growth rate historically, and then our current population is in red. And then if you take a look at the various growth scenarios, 62.4, 69.11, 76, 84. So those are the numbers that are kind of presented by the Office of Financial Management. And then below that is the quirk about the city of Woodland, because we have a bunch of projects that are in processing. And so we literally had 24 units in the previous 4 years, and now we've had almost 50, I think we had 48 units last year, probably end up with 60 units this year. So all of a sudden we go from a steady, slow rate to an exaggerated 3.9% rate. But the council essentially asked us to look at a 2.7 or 2.8 overall, which kind of takes into account, even though our current bump, they asked us to consider that. So that was the number that we had been talking about. Now, the consultant was looking at Cowlitz County and Clark County, and we are on the Clark County timeline. And the quirk of Clark County, because they have a lot of staff and a lot of expertise working on this, we discussed this at the last meeting, how they've asked us to take 0.1% of the growth population, because we currently represent 1/10 of the population of the county. So we got 109 units, even though our current unit count in Clark County inside of Horseshoe Lake, I believe it's 86 units now, and they're asking us to accommodate another 109. And the consultant and I talked to Commerce and asked them if we could transfer it to Cowlitz County, because that's where the bulk of our housing land is available. And Commerce essentially said, there's not really a tool for that, but we don't see how this could be accommodated otherwise, so we're going to go ahead and just assume that you're doing it in good faith and you're planning properly. So on the website, sorry Dave, you look like you have a question?
Yeah, I mean, we have to plan for that, right? And I guess when you're talking about that, are you talking about land within the city limits or land within the UGB?
Both.
Okay.
Within the UGB, really.
So, okay, I just don't understand. A couple months ago, I brought up that we could put more units in there with the PURD system in that zone, and so did that ever get to the consultant, or
With management works great in principle, but once you start applying those principles to a small community like ours, the numbers eventually start to break down. And that's why their allotment of 0.1% makes logic to them, because they're looking at Camas, Washougal, Vancouver, Battleground. So what works for the goose is good for the gander, but if we're the gander, it doesn't quite work for us, because the numbers don't work at our scale of essentially 80 units, 86 units. It doesn't work that way. Cowlitz County, and so what you see up on the board is the area of Clark County that is in the city, and that is the northern part there, and everything where you see the green down is our urban growth boundary, and that is a high quality forested wetland, so it's probably a Category 1 wetland, so it would almost be impossible to develop at maximum density there, simply because you could get the units, you just wouldn't be able to get the parking lot to accommodate all those units. And so we would either have to destroy the wetland and allow them to fully develop the site, or recognize that it's just not necessarily viable, because then we would be sacrificing either the environmental protection goals for the housing goals. And so growth management, we can't get all of the goals met on this individual piece of property, because it's essentially the only piece of property where we could accommodate those 100 plus units. So, and Commerce understands that, so that's why they kind of are like, okay, we'll look at your total numbers. On the website, there is the analysis by a CJ Alliance, and their estimate was that we needed a 20-year growth of about 700 housing units, and that includes theoretically the 100 from Clark County, because if we take our population growth and keep doing the math, we come up with 700 housing units. That doesn't necessarily accommodate the 109 units from Clark County, but theoretically the idea is consistent. If we just look at our numbers and do a growth projection, we come up with 700 units. The other document that you have in front of you is the document that I got from Cowlitz County, and I sent out an email today asking them, because I need to walk this through with them, and hopefully you have a copy with a circle in the middle of the page, and it is, so do you have that circle, or did I circle it after? It's right in the middle of the page. So you'll see that, okay, sorry, there's a blue line there that says their net new housing needed by 2046. That's their 20-year projection. So they have a total housing need of 55,460. They currently have 44,000, almost 45,000. So they need to accommodate 10,500 additional housing units in the next 20 years. That's kind of what their first run at these numbers shows. So it gives you an idea of what Cowlitz County, they're just at the start of this process. They're a year behind us. So this is kind of their rough numbers, and they're putting together a stakeholders meeting, which is what I was at, to help them talk through and think through these individually. Now, at the top of that page, you'll actually see that the projected population, it's about 100, I want to say it's about 110,000 now. Their low projection using the OFM, like we were looking at, is 115,000, medium is 128,000, 129,000 really, and about 144,000 on the high end. But that is kind of how they get to the 10,500 housing units that they need to accommodate. So they're trying to figure out which of those housing projections is going to be applicable depending on which population they use. Now, the second page of this report, and bear in mind that this is draft. This is nothing that's been adopted. It's staff's kind of first blush at the numbers, so don't hold it too accountable. And they, in the bottom part of that, you can see the individual cities: Castle Rock, Kalama, Kelso, Longview, Woodland. Those are kind of how they're distributing those housing units throughout. And I put in an email to staff asking exactly how, why they use that way, because it appears when they look at Woodland, with about 20% of the county's population growth, or that housing would be accommodated by Woodland, which means we would accommodate about another 2,000 units, which is how that math works. And theoretically, in King County, where there's millions of people, you might be able to do simple calculations like that. But for the city of Woodland, the idea that 20% of Cowlitz County's growth is going to occur here, the math doesn't work because we're only 6% of the county population. Therefore, shouldn't we really be using our number, which is based upon our growth projection, as opposed to a static number from the county? So I'm still asking for clarification on that, because actually, I'm sorry, this is our current number. I believe it's 2102. And they are estimating that we would get about another 2,000. So I'm still trying to figure out exactly what this means for us. But if you go to page 3, I think the information that we're going to have to wrestle with, and that is the first column, the emergency housing needs, the temporary housing. They estimate that the city of Woodland needs to come up with 42 emergency housing capacity units. And so we're going to have to try and figure out exactly what that means and how they would expect us to do that and where that would come from. So we're going to have to wrestle with that with the county. But it shows you the example of, I thought I had painted a bleak picture last meeting when I was talking about we're with Clark County a year ahead of time, so we're guessing what Cowlitz County is going to do next year. And now we kind of know what next year is going to look like, because if this Cowlitz County number is correct and they want us to accommodate 2,000 housing units, well, the total city population is about 2,100 housing units, which means they're going to have to give us an urban growth boundary that will double the size of the city. And if our capital facilities plan is assuming for a 2.3% growth rate, as opposed to a 100% replacement rate in 20 years. Our comp plan is not going to be consistent with Cowlitz County, or Cowlitz County is not going to be consistent with us, and I'm still trying to figure out how to handle that.
So,
But Dave, you ask tough questions, you get terrible answers.
here's a not so tough one. They talk about all these PSH and non-PSH. What's that the acronym for?
That's supportive housing. So it's like
Public housing, publicly supported housing?
no, I think it's supported housing, so it may be publicly supported housing. It may also be like the Woodland Care Center, where there are people who need special support considerations.
I wasn't even thinking that at all. And then, if, I guess you answered part of my question, but is there,
Yeah, the footnote says supply of PSH in 2020 is beds, so that falls upon.
um, so the graph that you had that showed that they expect 20.4% from Woodland, it just looks like they went in alphabetical order and said, oh, we're to the W's, we need, how much is left? And then I'm a little surprised that, unincorporated rural isn't higher on their, we're severely, I mean, what's the difference, just ballpark me here, between people in the city, or voters in the city versus voters in the school district? You know,
I'm sorry, what's the question?
the question, as far as comparison in populations, for the county has to plan for everybody.
Oh,
They only have 15% more growth in rural when, you know, in us and Kalama and Castle Rock, all of those, there's a small little city, but there's all those people in there using a school district as an example.
yes.
You know, there's all those people rural, and to think that that growth isn't gonna be more than
Yes.
the complications of doing it in a city.
Yes, and I'm already scratching and pulling my hair out because Woodland in typical fashion is more difficult because the Woodland School District includes Clark County. So, and for example, you brought up the impact fees and how do we handle this growth, the city of Woodland growth, which my understanding is about 35% of the student population, but that's an outdated number. I believe that was the number back in 2015. So it's been 10 years since I've known that, even seen data on that number. But if it's 1 in 3, essentially, that's City of Woodland. And then Cowlitz County has growth, but they do not pay impact fees. Clark County has growth, but they pay impact fees. So in a sense, I don't know what portion of that remaining population is county.
I guess my point is, I'm just a little surprised they don't have the rural as a higher growth rate
Yeah,
and coming up with,
yeah. And you can see why, and I can see why you get frustrated with my answer is because depending on what day of the week it is and who you talk to, we're all using damn different numbers for damn different reasons and driving everybody damn crazy. So part of me is inclined to say we're going to pick a path that makes sense to us and stick to it.
You told us, but I didn't pick it up. What is the Cowlitz County population now?
So I believe it's at the 110 range, and
10,000?
110,000, yep, and we are about 6,500 of that.
Which, so they're looking at, if their population is 110,000 now, and they're looking to go to 128,000, that's adding 18,000 people. They need 10,487 units for 18,000 people? At 1.8 people per,
We generally, in the past, planners use the number of 2.6 people per household. That number has been ranging down to 2.3. I've seen the most recent data, which appears to show about 1.8 to 1.9 because of the proliferation of single family or single parent homes in Washington state, and it is significantly affecting the amount of population per household.
yeah, down to 1.8, that means there's a whole lot of people living alone.
Yeah, so that would be consistent with what I've seen, but yeah, I mean, you hear people, population alarmists about we're not even doing repopulation for the existing seniors that are dying or existing death rate. Then data is frankly alarming.
Okay, so I have a question. Why should Woodland have more emergency housing than Longview or Kelso, who are larger?
So bear in mind that those are projections for additional need. So they asked me flat out, can I think of any? I don't know that we have any emergency housing availability here. Whereas they do have like shelters and in Longview and Kelso. So they don't need as much because they already have a supply.
If we're gonna have to plan for that, I'd like to know what the parameters are too, because, you know, I don't know if they still can, but it used to be like the police could rent a room for people that needed, you know, housing for a night, and I don't know what all qualifies in that. It would be, if we're gonna have to plan for it, we're gonna have to find out.
Well, and Deanna Holland, who was a council member for quite a few years, and the Woodland Action Center, the next call I make is to her to figure out, okay, where does she see the need, and is this accurate, and how are we going to handle that? Yeah, so, but she's been shouting in the wind about that since I met her. Okay, if I bummed you out enough, time to move on.
Sure.
So I do also wanted to take a few minutes to talk about something a little more positive, and that is for those of you like Sharon and Brian who's been through most of this with me, we have a significant amount of public input and engagement that has occurred up to this point. So I just want to get that on the record so that because I'm working on those chapters. So in 2018-2019, when we talked about our comprehensive plan update last time, we talked about our growth scenarios and where we can expand the urban growth boundary. We had 8 public hearings, and I don't know how many open houses because I didn't keep track of them, but those 8 public hearings was quite a bit of effort in 18-19. We had several hundred people come through those meetings and give testimony.
They were lively.
Yeah. Were you on the planning commission at that time? I don't think I think you
I've gone
came.
through a couple of them
I
with
think
the
you
Woodland
came in.
Bottoms expansion options and such, and they were lively.
I think I wrangled you just in time to sit in a vacancy so that you could vote on that, if I remember correctly. Sharon, you got the full double-barreled shotgun of those.
I don't remember you fully explaining the kind of pressure I'd be signing up for. Probably wisely so.
And then in 2021, during the COVID issues, we went through a housing analysis. We had a total of 9 public hearings, and of those, 4 of those were conducted online. And so that brings us up to 17 comp plan discussions. In 2023, we did the Climate Resilience Pilot Project. And we had 4 public meetings, 2 open houses, and 2 hearings on that. And the final adoption was in December of 2023. We've also had in 2023 a comp plan update public involvement, where I just randomly started holding open houses and asking people like Donna, who showed up to almost every one of those. Thank you very much, Donna. Citizen of the decade, as far as I'm concerned. So 13 open houses, 9 workshops, or 8 workshops, and 6 public meetings and public hearings in that effort. And then that kind of petered out because we got our grant. We were hoping to delay a year to go with Cowlitz County, but instead they threw us directly into the 2024-2025 comp plan. And so far we've had 14 meetings and open houses on that. And we are in the home stretch. There's about 6 left. And next month, essentially, you will be presented with the complete draft comprehensive plan. And at which point, I will probably ask you maybe in August to make a recommendation to the planning, or to the city council. And so, even though you may not necessarily have had a lot of turnout and public involvement at your meetings, I wanted you to know that I have received several hundred individual comments and held discussions with several hundred members of the community over the years about our comprehensive plan. So at this point, I want to point out that we are not writing the comprehensive plan from scratch. We're really kind of doing a bearing check, making sure that our compass is still pointed north and that it's where the community expects to be. Because the 2026 or the 2016 plan was supposed to plan till 2023 or 2036. So we're not even halfway through the original comprehensive plan. So if you're concerned by the fact that we're not making major changes or going in major directions, it's because we are doing a compass check to make sure that our community is heading the direction that the community wants. So, any questions or comments about that?
Did you have any turnout? You had one the other night.
Yes, so I had one person show up, and I was here for 3 hours, and they showed up for an hour and a half, and we went through the various stages of public outreach, from anger to grief to denial to, I don't remember all of the stages, but it's, yeah. So they had a good time and they left with a smile and appreciated the fact that I spent an hour and a half with them, and we agreed on a lot of things. So that's the previous one we did. I did one on Saturday earlier or in mid-March, and I was here for 6 hours, and I ended up with 11 people at various times, including the mayor, and Donna, of course, brought her contingent of family. So, but yeah, I pretty much had someone here the whole time and ended up speaking to the mayor, ex-council members, and various people. So in the last month, I've reached out to a lot of separate people.
So have the comments been pretty much positive? Or
I'm sorry?
have things been positive?
Yes. Yep. Everybody is dying to take a look at the transportation chapter, but when we get onto that topic, I always bring my Exit 21 visuals of the roundabouts versus the traffic lights, and we talk about that. I explain to my knowledge, how much traffic goes into Clark County, how much goes up Lewis River Road, how much goes into the bottom, and I kind of frame it in terms of we are only 50% of the traffic, and therefore we can, only solve so much, and we're wrestling with that with one hand tied behind our back too. But there are a lot of people who are going to download that transportation chapter and probably write in or make some comment on it as well. So
I have a question. We have this that says 2.7%, and I saw our sewer, and, looking through the capital facilities and all that stuff, and they're all in there, but in our shows a 0.72% assumption, assumed annual population growth rate on the chart. Section 3.1.
Okay, so I will check that and make sure and find out exactly what's going on.
Should we check some math real quick? If we have a,
Part
we
of-
have a 2024 population of 6575, and we add 1,100 people, who's good with their percentages?
I don't have a calculator, and I'm not gonna stab. Figure that out. Co-chair Nick.
Okay, so
Okay.
current population 6575, and target population in 20 years is 7642. It's less than, yeah, it's about 0.72 on the, if we take 6575, 6575 times 1.072, 7,048, so it's somewhere under 2.7, it's way under 2.7 in this projection here.
Yeah, you're right. I'm gonna have to check that number. So that may be an error because, so I will have to ask them to check their calculations with the housing projections, with the population projection, because we can't grow by 30% of our housing stock and only grow 0.72 annually, even compounding over 20 years, it would be more than that to equal 30%.
Just thinking of less than 1% growth doesn't seem right.
Yeah.
I mean, just the number itself just seems.
Well, that was in the deal they sent you today,
I better check that.
so
Oh, so that was in the housing or the land use?
section 3, table 3, section 3, that is land use, but it's talking about housing.
I only have the housing plan here.
I'm sorry.
No, but
I don't have the.
we don't have a paper copy of it.
Yeah, I just have the housing.
Okay, so I will pull it up.
And Travis, not to worry you about my competence, but our homework that we had, right? That was just the spreadsheet you had given us, wasn't it?
Yep.
Okay, I did that right, because I was thinking, I thought you showed us where to find all these other documents, which I couldn't remember when I was
Okay, I'll show you
doing
that.
my review again. So I just went through this that you had printed out for us two months ago, I think.
So-
That's what I made my comments on.
Does this look familiar, David? Is this the document you're talking about?
Yeah, scroll down.
Is that
There,
what you
that's
emailed
the-
us today?
Assumed annual population growth rate.
Oh, yeah.
And then I raised questions about the undeveloped residential land and underdeveloped residential land.
Yep.
Did they look into that any further on, what was counted and what wasn't?
I did not hear back from them, but I will ask Jeffrey. So that is.
That, I'm just looking at this table also, that undeveloped residential land, is that part of the Clark County portion that's virtually undevelopable in the shoreline floodplain? I mean, it's a big chunk of land
Yeah.
lying south, so that would skew that pretty well too. I don't know if that's something you build into
Or the
what's considered undeveloped or can't be developed. 'Cause
Flood,
there's a difference.
floodway or wetland shoreline.
And this is still planning for, like, oh, I can't think of the name of the project now there by I-5, Logan's Landing?
Logan's Landing is not included in that.
Okay.
So you wanted to know where to find this stuff, so
I struggled finding that stuff, I'm sorry.
okay.
It is cumbersome to get to, because then you load something up and, no, that's not the stuff I was looking for, and you go,
Okay, so from the main city's webpage,
Right.
you go down to the pull-down menu for City Hall. Under Community Development is our planning projects page,
Planning projects.
and this
Okay,
is,
I found that.
yep, and if you scroll down these project pages, you could find it under City of Woodland, but the quickest way that I know is to click on City Hall, because all of the City Hall projects, all of the city projects are geotagged to City Hall, and then, and that helps you find it on the list.
Clicked on it, City Hall, okay.
And then if you scroll up, you come across, look for our timeline, and when you click on that, it shows you the timeline that we are using for the project. And then scroll down, this is our public outreach calendar, stuff that's coming up. And then
then you get to files, then you click again.
under files, yep.
Okay.
And again,
Alright.
I've tried to put it, so what I
hope
did
I
is,
don't ask you.
that big nasty Excel spreadsheet, I put it first, and then the rest of it is basically grouped by chapter.
There's no
So-
getting a hot button on the map for this.
I could try finding one that's a little more efficient. Unfortunately, I don't.
Do we have a wet tech guy, or is that you?
That's me.
You're-
For this website, I can do this all myself. But my problem is I could make it findable by the map, but I don't know where I would put the pin, where I would put the geotag for other than City Hall. And so most people know where City Hall
All
is.
you can
but
put is a pin?
yeah,
You can't put a box with a name, or you can't put anything else, just a pin?
because it's all listed in alphabetical order, and so it starts with the numbers, then goes to the alphabet, starting with A, and yeah, unfortunately, that's a limit on our website.
If you are able to get to it, you exceed me in my technical prowess, so. If there's a way to get to it, you've already surpassed what I could do.
I will look to see if we can't maybe create at the home screen like a banner at the top that might take us there directly. I'll ask.
It might get more public input if it's a little easier to find.
Right, 'cause you're gonna ask us to go through these chapters again, right? Once you, I would assume.
Yes.
Can I ask, I don't know if this is a good question or not, to what extent am I gonna know whether the numbers are accurate or not? Like Dave seems to have a pretty good spatial awareness of what these numbers are supposed to be, but I don't know that I have that, right? I don't know if I'm gonna know that that number doesn't look right or not, just instinctively.
And that's part of the reason why, like, for example, on the housing chapter, there is the clean draft. That's the corrected, the consultant went through and changed, updated the numbers, that kind of stuff. That's what we mean by, I was giving you the track changes where it crossed out the previous number and then put the new number, but I got a lot of comments that was super confusing, so I just accepted them all. That's the clean copy. If you want a copy of the track changes to see what it said before, I can send that to you, but for simplicity, the clean copy is kind of what you will see when it gets printed out if you had a paper copy. And then underneath that is, so there's the analysis document, and then underneath that is the legislative summary of the housing issues that have changed. Then underneath that is the housing capacity memo. So if you just wanted to read the chapter and say, do I believe this is heading in the right direction for policy and goals, That's really kind of what you're looking at. And if you want to dive into the policy wonk issues, like Dave was like immediately spotted, okay, there's an inconsistency between these two. That's why some of them have 3 or 4 documents and other ones just have a single document. So I'm trying to split the difference depending on what the chapter is. And then you get down to, like I mentioned before, so there's an economic development draft. It's pretty straightforward. The Parks and Rec draft is pretty straightforward. The capital facilities is pretty straightforward. And part of that is because we just did the Parks and Rec plan based on a 20-year growth projection in 23. And then the capital facilities plan, we pulled a little out of the 2015, a little out of the 2017, a little out of the 2020, because those are 6-year funding cycles, and it's a 20-year plan. So the 2020 water plan, we're only 5 years into it, but we're planning financially for year 2025 through 2031. So the comp plan is looking for 2046. So the snapshot again is they're all moving on different timelines. And that's why they have the arbitrary split, the difference between the 2.8% population rate versus the 2.3. And for some reason the question is, why are we looking at 0.72 on the housing?
Well, because of this whole county allotment thing, you know, I did 3 previous comp plan updates, and we always, kind of the first thing we did, we said, okay, what's our target growth rate? We did all the studies to hit a target. This is what we anticipate the growth rate to be, and this is what we're going to plan for, you know, and then all of the other elements worked off of that growth rate. Whereas we had this first letter from the consultant talking about county shares of population stuff, and I was looking at that going, I don't know how the public works guys are going to work with that number. They need to plan for, you know, what's the water demand. They need a head count, and we're not getting a head count. So that's,
Yeah, you
and
can't
then
start
it's no surprise that that number's so off compared to those guys that have to actually work off a head count. And this is a bed count or something that,
Yeah. Which is why I've said all along, the numbers, GMA in some ways is counterproductive, because we have mandates for Clark County and they're 5 times the size, and they come up with one calculation, and Cowlitz County doesn't have to play by the same rules, and they're 1/5 of the size, and so the numbers they come up with completely different, but we are obligated to plan like Clark County does, and trying to...
if we had to plan like Clark County does, we wouldn't have to add near the units like Cowlitz County's thinking right now in their preliminaries.
Yes, and ultimately our difficulty is we have to be consistent with both plans. Otherwise we couldn't be GMA compliant. So even if we follow Clark County, we would be consistent with them, but we wouldn't be consistent with Cowlitz County. And even though it looks like Cowlitz County is the one that is a little more outside the norm, we may be obligated to amend our comprehensive plan after they adopt their comprehensive plan, because we would be found not in compliance with the Growth Management Act if they adopt numbers that are different than ours.
Yeah.
Which is why I wanted to wait and do it with Cowlitz County, because...
So, I don't want to beat this to death, and maybe you don't know the answer to this question. Do you feel pressure to align your plan, like you have 2 different standards, and they're wildly different, right? Do you feel pressure that we should be closer to Cowlitz's goal, because that's who we would need to allow us to annex more land into our... Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes,
Do we want to cater to them more because they have more power allowing us to expand than Clark? I
Yes, I do.
Okay. I don't know if I can.
Entered Woodland, I jokingly say Woodland, we're at the beach and we're looking towards the beach, which is Cowlitz County, thinking we are Cowlitz County. And the whole time, the wave that's going to smash us in the back and drive our face into the sand is coming from Clark County. All of that growth is coming north, and we are looking north, ignoring the pressure that comes from us from the south. And at some point, the wave is going to hit us, and it's hitting us. It's been hitting us for a couple of years now, and our face is being driven into the sand, and there's nothing I can do to try and figure out how to manage that.
It seems like we have to plan for those numbers, especially if we want to look at increasing the urban growth boundary. You know, and we also have to look at trends, and there's more townhomes and duplexes and things going in North Clark County than I can believe, and it's just, that's what's affordable, and that's what people can buy, and so,
The state is adding pressure for that also.
Yeah.
I mean, doing what they can. to
well, and
increase supply.
they've done things in the past, you know, they had that, infill
Infill subdivision
stuff, and, yeah, and, you know, I think we adjusted our short plat.
So we talked about that, but we didn't adopt that. We also haven't adopted the 3-plex, 4-plex, 6-plex, multiple ADUs on every lot. That's required by state law, but
Right.
we have not adopted that.
You
And
have to comply with that.
that's my
opinion.
frustration with the Growth Management Act. The Growth Management Act is not about what the community wants, it's what the state wants. And they want us to change the character of Woodland so that they can achieve the goals of preservation and high quality living in Washington State. Doesn't make sense, because when you get to the small town scale, especially a small town like us that has to fully comply with the Growth Management Act, they are forcing us to change the very DNA of our community because it makes them feel better. And I think ultimately, Dave, you hit the nail right on the head, and I brought this up at the last meeting, and that is, we may end up with planning for 700 or 900 units, and if the county plans for 2,000, then they need to decide our urban growth boundary, because the entire conversation in 2018 and 2019 was,
Gives you leverage
Well,
for
that's-
asking for it, right?
That's where it's important to be able to look at the county and say, these are our numbers, this is our acreage, this is our opportunity within what we have, and so, if you want us to meet this stuff,
yeah,
we can't do it without
yeah,
increasing.
yeah. The problem
Which they
is,
fought last time,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
I mean, that
The
was a
problem
big
is,
problem with us.
as an example of arbitrary numbers, when I was going through that effort, I think I came up with, in 30 years, we're going to need 2,800 units. And Cowlitz County stepped up and said, you've got to stop, you're crazy, you're not going to go there.
They
And
come back with
ironically,
this.
here we are 5 years later, and they're saying, oh, the real crazy number is 2,000, not 2,800. Of course, there's been 200 and 300 houses built since then, so it wasn't that crazy. But yeah, I was just arbitrarily guessing using the existing growth rate of 2.8, or I think I used 2.8 at that time. And yeah, it just goes to show you, it is all an arbitrary statistical effort.
So, if Cowlitz County is putting this pressure on us, I don't see any building or anything going on in like Kelso Longview. Is that, am I wrong?
So in those sheets, it shows what they expect them to grow. So
What are they?
that's the good question. Theoretically,
I would imagine they are everybody's building.
and part of
Yeah, there's,
They
yeah,
have to be.
a lot of it isn't always a subdivision right on 503 like you see here, where they're building, you know, so, I don't know, see a lot more of that. I haven't been really on the loose in Cowlitz County much, but
And it's a nickel here, it's a nickel there, and it's up in Ariel and up the Lewis River Road and up Green Mountain Road, and they're kids in our school district, but you would never see them because they're just not around. Yeah.
yeah. And Kalama has a bunch
Yeah, I
of,
think Kalama has had his houses going up, aren't they?
yeah, they got.
And
It
David,
reminds me of a new piece of business I'd like to bring up at some point when we're not talking about this.
okay. And Dave hit the nail on the head when he said, you look at that list, it looks like they just arbitrarily, you get 20%, you get 15%, you get 15%.
The numbers
It
are
looks,
awful,
yeah.
you know, secular.
And-
There's no 13.8.
And the problem I have is, if we're 6% of the county, they should do the math and say 6 becomes 7 or 6,500 becomes 8,500 becomes 9,500. If you give me a number of 9,500, then I can work backwards like we are supposed to, as opposed to just saying, okay, you're going to get 2,000 and you're going to go to 14,000 because it's 20% of our 20-year growth. And that's even more arbitrary than
It gets less.
statistically
sappy. It
going
looks less
2% or
pathy
8% or
when it's
0.7%. Because historically, part of our problem is you look back to 2017, we've had a very, very low growth rate simply because we haven't had a lot of subdivisions since Meriwether filled in. Meriwether Hilltop was an additional, I want to say, 300 lots, and they went belly up, and they had Scott Hill Park, so that used to be 300 housing units, and now it's 0 housing units. So, you know, if those houses had been built, we probably would have been at a 2.8, 2.3% growth rate.
Here's an interesting factoid, looking at that assumptions table again in land use. So they give us a 2045 population target of 7642 with 3,019 target units, which is 2.53 people per house, per unit, instead of the,
And I think they probably break it down to apartments versus homes, single-family homes. And the expectation is we have a lot of apartments in the pipeline.
I was just saying that we had that other number of 1.8 people per unit in Cowlitz County, and then this is our consultant, and their stuff has it at 2.53 people per unit, which, you know, we gotta pin Cowlitz County down on a bunch more stuff, I guess, because that number seems just a little. I was,
Travis, did you have anything else, or are we wrapping up the last thing you were wanting to talk about?
So I
Thinking
thought
about moving along.
I thought if you didn't have any other issues to talk about, we could start going through that list. That's why I gave you just the shortened version. So I thought we would go over what the consultant had commented on and find out whether you wanted to make any changes or incorporate any of their comments.
should you print one of these for Donna so she can enjoy the pain of the small font with it?
I have one extra one. Actually, I thought I had left an extra one.
Need a magnifying glass in it.
That's mine at home.
I can call it up on the screen as well. I think actually I already have it up.
Okay, I have my notes in here.
I sent my comments on this to you, but I don't have them in front of me, Travis.
ones
sorry,
we don't.
Brian, did you not see yours on there?
Is it on there? I did.
So
I just sent them to you today,
so
so if you got 'em
I-
on here, that's
I
amazing.
incorporated them and on the online version, but it doesn't look like I have the online version.
Okay, okay.
I didn't print the online version with your columns in it. It is available online, but it's not. Let me
And again, my comments they're just comments, you know. I'm sure I'm gonna feel the same if I read them again,
But
I
yes,
don't wanna, I don't wanna, you know,
yep. But
contradict
for
what I just.
for here example, so I added an additional
Oh, okay.
column in lavender, and I put initials behind which planning commission member made that comment.
Thanks
So
for
they
choosing lavender for my comments.
all planning commission members are lavender.
Do you have some kind of connotation?
No.
But yes, I didn't print those today, so I thought we would go over kind of the orange stuff that the consultant looked at. Really worth, let's see. So if you don't have any objections, do you want to go over the consultants related comments?
Sure, we go over the orange, yep.
Yep. So LU 1.3, which is the land use policy 1.3 about placing utilities underground where possible. Not necessary, and it could be included under 1.1 above.
I disagree. I think we should leave it, give it some gravity of its own.
Well, it's also different than 1.1, in my opinion, because 1.1 is saying designing, sizing, and constructing. Well, that stuff's gonna be designed to be underground. 1.3 is talking about taking above ground stuff and undergrounding it, which is different, right?
All of the above. It gives the city some, yeah.
Okay. Anybody disagree?
What's the harm in leaving it, yeah?
Right.
Okay, so the next one is land use 1.6, which says combined with 1.7.
Well, they're different things. You know, designing a subdivision to avoid natural stuff is different than providing public and private open space. They are two different things. I'm okay with keeping them separate.
Me too.
I agree.
Okay, so I assume the same's probably true for 1.7. Leave them separate. 1.8, move to capital facilities element.
That seems reasonable, right? Because they're talking about level of service. Capital facilities or transportation.
So
Or
when
that's-
you have a developer that you're requiring mitigation, you know, requiring them to mitigate their impacts, I kinda don't mind if it's said twice, in land use and in capital facilities, so that they get the point across that you gotta compensate for your impacts.
I certainly agree with developers paying for their impacts.
And that's a good point, really, because the purpose of the land use regulations are to ensure the developer mitigates for their impacts. Isn't the capital facilities chapter to make sure the city is providing the,
future
the
needs.
underlying public infrastructure as opposed to site by site. It's not a land use issue, it's not a capital improvement, it's a
I think you'd have to really
development
dig
issue.
to go find it there when you need it, compared to if it's in land use.
I agree.
And that's a good point. If they were applying for an application for subdivision, I wouldn't look in the capital facilities. But if Public Works was building a new reservoir, I would look in the capital facilities section. Pretty logical. Now we might see why Cowlitz County is not necessarily using consultants, because they might
Oh,
have expertise,
get
but
me started
no
on-
local knowledge, right? If they're listening out there tonight, no offense, guys, but. Okay, so the next one might be the next page, land use goal number 2. If the city has a historical preservation commission, consider, the answer to that is we do not. The city has done a historical inventory several years ago, and all of the inventory that was, that qualified was added to the DAP, the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation. It was added to their system and is on file with the State Office of Archaeology.
seems like we tossed around the idea of having a historical preservation and recognition and all kinds of things in years past, but there is actually a lot of regulation that comes with having a recognized house as well that seem to make people shy away from the whole thing.
Yeah. Although if there's anybody with energy like in the downtown revitalization, I think Adonica
them our
would
way.
love to get involved with
Send them
running
our
that as
way.
well. If she doesn't have enough to do.
She doesn't have enough help, that's for sure. Yeah,
I don't know if I wanna get rid of it, right? I mean, it says policy, but it doesn't equate into regulation, right? It's just a policy, it's encourage, that's a light fluffy word. We'd love it if you took care of your historic building, who wouldn't, right? I'm fine with it.
Well, and people who come in for development review, and Brett, as a longtime Woodland resident, can tell you when people come in and talk to me, I am constantly making suggestions, trying to push them into creative solution. Preserve this, think about this, incorporate that. If you were to donate this, we could do this, this, and this. That's about the extent of encouragement, because I can't force
You
them.
can't force them, right? So
Yeah.
It's just encouraging.
But still, it's one of those questions. One of the things that the consultant does talk about, and that is we need to develop some kind of tools to measure how well we're doing on these. And
I don't know.
maybe additional historical regulations are something that we want to tackle in the future. And we want something in the comprehensive plan that enables us to hang our hat on something saying it is a community value for us to value our downtown and preserve our 100 Davidson. And
Does the goal in these policies give you that?
you know, LU 2.5, investigate the potential of establishing a local historic preservation program, and on there, basically gives 1, 2, 3, and 4 a reason, right? We gotta have the first few goals in order to have
Right.
that last goal, so.
I think that whole section is just fine the way it is.
Okay. I'm fine with it too.
And then land use goal number 3 is kind of new ground.
Yeah,
And-
that's like state imposed stuff.
You just,
Yeah,
you
yes.
just took a long, we just took a long time discussing how hard this would be. Right? Complying with them both, okay. I don't know if we could ensure compliance with them both, if they're widely different. But again, you know I keep repeating myself, but these goals, I mean, they're not regulations. So if you changed them, fine. If you didn't, fine with that too, right? I don't have strong feelings one way or the other because
Yeah.
they're just goals and policies.
As the city planner, I'm lame enough to say as consistent as possible should be added, but
Okay.
commerce would never accept that, right? Because it's totally counterproductive to
Right.
why are we doing
What
this
says
exercise?
possible, right?
Yeah. Ignoring it is entirely possible. So I do the best I can with the constraints that we're given.
So, while we're in there and it's talking about LU4 that allow for the siting of organic material management facilities, we're talking about like the wood chipping people? Is that what it is?
That's what I read it as.
You're talking land use 4?
Yeah.
No, that's the application of organic materials. Like we have solids that are extracted from our wastewater treatment plant, and they are allowed to, and as a matter of fact, we ship them to Central Washington, where there is an approved farm that applies them as fertilizer on their crops. We used to do it in the bottoms, but they were no longer certified, so we had to find a new one.
Waltz is doing, I mean, drive by that place.
No, that's just their
That's the-
wash down pond. Yeah,
What are
and
they
then
doing with it?
there's
They-
enzymes that work it over, and then there actually effluent goes into the wastewater treatment plant that under a special permit because they're not in the city.
Yep.
But at the time they say there's good effluent and there's bad effluent, and that's good effluent. It feeds the bugs at the wastewater treatment plant, which those guys, if you've talked to them very long, they're really into their bugs.
Yep.
And keeping
I
the,
just assumed it was for fertilizer.
I assumed it was like, yeah, the places that pile
I'm
up.
gonna mix it with water and spray it on the field.
Well, I assumed it was where they pile up all the wood waste that gets ground and things. So that's interesting. So to comply with that, what would Woodland have to do?
Well, and that's again why I think growth management doesn't fit in all cases, because I suppose theoretically we would be able to allow agricultural uses like the Thoney's farms and the industrial area that is still in farm use, that they would be able to apply if they got the proper state permits to do so. But that's such a hassle at a small scale, it's not worth the effort. So it's unlikely to ever affect us, but it's a goal
But
of
it's
the
saying if somebody did apply, we have to allow for it. That's what it's saying. Does that have to be part of our comprehensive plan?
According to the consultant, yes, and they specifically cite a RCW which was adopted in 2022. So off to the right it says, development regulations newly developed, updated, and amended after January 2025 allow for the siting of organic material management facilities as identified in local solid waste management plans to meet OM reduction and diversion goals. So there must be some kind of regulations that we would have to follow, but
Okay.
if it's state law, it's state law.
So I have heard recently that the idea of taking, waste sewage and.
Are you talking into a mic?
I
Okay.
think, I thought I was.
Sorry, I couldn't see it behind the computer.
Yeah, and, fertilizing agricultural fields with it. I think it's not exactly a good idea anymore because of the amount
Yeah. And I'm not sure how we would even address that at the local level, especially if the state is requiring us to put in a GMA goal that.
Yeah, yeah.
And again, this might be one of those cases where if we don't adopt this one, is commerce gonna skewer us if we don't? So
Well, but it's not
maybe
likely,
maybe
it's not
we'll
all that likely to happen, right?
maybe I'll star this one as highly suspect and not worth falling on our sword over.
I don't know if I should say this out loud, but I'm gonna do it anyway. Is there any value in not including something and then just saying, well, if they make us, then they make us? I mean, not, like Dave said, this is part of the comprehensive growth plan? I mean, we have to comply with state law, but does it have to be part of the comp plan?
I can kind of understand that being mandated at a county level, that counties have to allow that, but within a city, we can't even burn our own leaves in the inside of urban growth boundary anymore. You know, I don't know. Maybe somebody needs to look at that RCW and find out some of the guidelines there between now and.
Quite frankly, I don't know anything about it, so I'm gonna rely on you to tell me.
I was assuming it was piles of wood chips, so.
Okay, so I will star that one for legal opinion. 4.1, identify special land use. So this is a continuation of that one, so I will include that. Land use goal number 5, ensure that all communities, especially those historically marginalized, have equitable access to clean air, water, green spaces, and other environmental resources. Prioritize investments in environmental infrastructure and services, parks, public transit, stormwater management in underserved neighborhoods.
We don't already do all that? We just don't say historically marginalized? Right? Isn't that kind of part of every other goal and policy? We just haven't used the words historically marginalized.
And their comments off to the right basically is that it gives special consideration to environmental justice, which is really it. That is a new aspect of the Growth Management Act that wasn't there previously. So it is something we have to consider. So unless there's something wrong with the underlying goal, it is pretty consistent with, I think, Woodland's character to want to provide all of those good resources.
I mean, I'm looking at the far right here. Give special consideration to achieving environmental justice and goals and policies, including efforts to avoid creating or worsening environmental health disparities. All right.
Sounds good.
Sounds good to me. Don't make things worse.
And you know, I think it's interesting because really where my initial thoughts about this wouldn't have gone there, but really the fact that we do have a significant number of RVs and manufactured homes, that could be considered an alternate form of housing that has that kind of environmental justice. Because, for example, are they unfairly placed in the floodplain? That could be a consideration, but considering that our entire city, the residential areas are almost all in the floodplain. So from an environmental justice point of view is, yeah, I stick you all in the floodplain, whether you're a manufactured home or an RV or a stick-built home. there is that kind of equality, so there's no reason why we shouldn't lean into it, because everybody is in the same boat.
I don't see any of those type of properties in our city, dealing with any kind of like industrial blight or anything. We have had good planning and good separation and good transition in most instances from, what would be housing into industrial especially. We don't have a whole lot of those issues. I don't know, when we look at the impacts and who's vulnerable and the impacts of it, it's not like some of the places I can think about in Portland and some of the other cities where there is problems. There is pollution from the freeway for 40 years and things. So I don't know, maybe we can condense those a little bit. But I think we're gonna see a lot of what we need already in our code. It just doesn't use the words environmental justice,
So I think 5 and 5.1 are relatively simple and benign in that we do a lot of that balancing as it is. I think 5.2 is the one that might raise a few hackles here in requiring comprehensive environmental health impact assessments. That's an additional level of complexity that right now we use SEPA as that tool. But this might be a statement that we are going to do an exponential complexity to every project that comes in the door.
The SEPA is a comprehensive environmental health impact assessment.
Because
We're already doing that.
yeah, because the policy says require, as opposed to leaving the regulations to determine whether that's necessary. Because if the goal in the policy is for all development to get one of those, that's a significant policy statement.
especially in or near historically disadvantaged or vulnerable communities. So we first have to identify those.
Yeah,
Right.
your issue
But-
is that it uses the word require.
But you wouldn't have to narrow that down, because if you require it for everybody,
Why don't we
everybody's
just
got to
switch
do
out
it.
require with encourage? All the other goals say encourage.
Why don't we just require the SEPA to point out if there's any disadvantaged or vulnerable, historically disadvantaged or vulnerable communities in the SEPA?
I don't know that it addresses that in that SEPA checklist.
So I know there are tools that are being developed to kind of map these and be able to take a look at them. Because when we were doing the climate discussion, and there was a discussion about the justice effects of climate change, that you could get onto a website that was being developed and analyze, okay, how susceptible is your community to this? And if there was a tool like that, then we could incorporate it. But I would think that that's not necessarily something that you would put in the comprehensive plan, because if it's not ready for 5 years, what do we do about it? And what happens if 10 years from now they come up with a better product than the last 10 years of the comprehensive plan? We're requiring them to use an out-of-date model that is no longer applicable. So that require seems like a pretty significant, drastic policy
I
statement.
support switching out require with a more agreeable verb.
It says new required though on the,
I know.
Yeah, okay, so I will have to spend some time and I will
So,
think about that and try and come back with you with something.
yeah, what works for you?
Donna, thoughts?
Yeah, work that over the environmental justice, climate resilience, you know I'm all there.
Yes, but now you know I'm not drinking the Kool-Aid completely.
I'm glad to hear it.
6.1 and 6.2 and 6.3, protect for fire mitigation for wildfires, all sounds good to me.
Yeah, it's a sign of the times. It was high on our, community input thing too, so.
Okay, so with housing one, do you want to take a break or call it quits or?
So this is what I think about it, and you guys are welcome to, I'm not sold on the idea. I'd like to wrap it up by 9 o'clock. That's what it says.
By what time?
By 9.
By 9, okay.
I mean, we have to continue it, but there's only so long where I'm gonna be able to pay attention, going down
Yeah,
a
we could-
spreadsheet, I mean, I'm human, and I have the attention span of a mosquito sometimes, so.
And
I
that's
tend to agree.
and that's why I gave you a printed copy. So if you want to write notes on this, you can turn it in to me at the office, and I will put it all on there, and get it out there for everybody else to read and see where you're going.
The font's 3 times the size as the old one too, that helps.
Yes, yeah, I realized when I printed that last one, it wasn't going to work. So
Do you need a break? We can take a break if you need a break.
Well, I mean, if we
Power
get-
through the last
if
9
we got
minutes.
10 minutes left, do we even want to bother moving on to the housing or?
Is this a good place to stop?
It's a great place to stop.
It's a great place to stop.
So maybe what I'll do real quick is just talk to you about the last documents that you have in front of you, which is the climate resilience chapter that was adopted. And one of the quirks about that is when the consultant that was hired for that chapter, they went through the existing goals and policies of the previous chapters and kind of figured out, okay, pull this one from here, this one from here. I will send you a copy of that original document because each of those policies, like for example, in the agricultural resiliency section, that I believe came out of the land use section. So those aren't necessarily all new. Most of them were existing goals and policies that were in the previous plan. They just added some language to ensure that we do agricultural activities that are more resilient for future considerations like burning or droughts or shorter growing seasons, longer growing seasons. So those are kind of the issues that we want to make sure we're prepared for, whether they occur or not. So that's why I gave that to you today, because it is on the web page, but it's not on the comp plan update. It is on the climate resilience pilot project web page. And so if the comp plan project page is hidden, this one is even more hidden. So
Well, I remember going through this stuff with our consultants.
yeah. So
We shouldn't have to change this part that much. This wasn't that long ago, right?
no, which is why I've kind of kept it off to the side, just a lot like the park and rec, and that is it's so new. Arguing about the old argument is not even the wounds haven't healed, let alone are opening them up again. Okay. So any questions? What would you like me to work on? So you will have a complete draft at the next meeting, and it is essentially done. We will send that complete draft to Commerce for them to give it a first look over, but we have until December of this year to actually get it to the council and adopted. But we are at the home stretch in this next month. If you could make a point to read it and give me your comments, it'll be really important. The next month is probably the most important, because I want your comments submitted to the consultant before they kind of create that final document for our grant is done. We will have used all of their resources by the end of next June, or the end of June.
So do I need a comment for them to, about the acreage availabilities and then the
Yes.
population growth rate and all that? Send you an email with all that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Were you asking us to go through the rest of this before next month and just make comments and get them to you? So
I would absolutely
Okay.
love that, because then it'll make
do
the
my
next
best.
meeting that much easier.
You're encouraging me to review it and make comments.
So a while ago, I know it's been a while, I brought up to you about making anything that requires a SWACA permit a conditional use. And I sent you that in an email. Have you looked into that at all?
So I added
As
that.
I see this resilient list stuff and
So I have not moved it forward. I added it to my list of what we call our retooling our code
Yeah.
list. It's the list that's constantly accruing issues that we might want to put on the burner for later discussion later. So yes, so I haven't forgot it.
there's gonna be a retooling our code deal
Bat
this year.
at some point. My guess is it'd probably be a 2026, early 2026 effort, because by the time we're done with the comp plan, it's
So another thing I had, when I said I had something new to discuss and ask about, we've had 2 incidents now in development, as we're looking at growing, this is why, as we look at growing, expanding our UGB, doing whatever we're gonna do. Meriwether, 1, 2, and 3, they scraped, I don't know how many feet off the top of Scott Hill and carried it down and put it down for 1 and 2 to be above flood level, and left a big hole up there for where the park is now. And then Oak Village Apartments or whatever, they did the same thing. Was that in the millions of cubic yards of material that they?
it was in I believe it was a couple 100,000, but we require them to do a no net loss of storage review,
So that's not what I'm talking about.
and they also do a no net rise analysis.
That's not what I'm talking about either.
Okay.
I'm talking about mining. At
Oh.
some point, you cross a line between fill and grade and actual mining.
Don't you have to extract something from it?
They did.
Well,
In every aspect, when you extract 200,000 yards of material, that actually what they're doing.
that's
when
just grading, unless you're taking something out of the dirt, taking something out of that.
when you,
If you're taking something out of the dirt, you're mining. But if you're moving the dirt, you're grading.
if you're moving the dirt where? From
Still grading.
from one property to another?
It's an
Oh, I see
extraction,
I see what you're saying.
and
So
it's a
When you do
commercial
that,
activity.
And then one thing that's being lost there,
I'm with you now.
but here's what it is, it's tax evasion is what it is.
Mm.
At the end of the day.
Yeah.
And we're just kinda curious, as we look to moving forward,
That is a
you
great
know,
question.
it changes the face of the landscape,
It is a great
greatly.
question.
and for the
'Cause-
purposes of not, you know, I understand everything about taking lemons and making lemonade. But in the same token, should there be a threshold where it's like 10,000 yards is it? You know, I mean, 10,000 yards is a lot of material. When you're talking 200 plus thousand yards, it's enough to cover 20 acres, 4 feet deep. It's,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know.
And it's a commercial activity because they're moving it to a subdivision to add value to that subdivision
Yeah.
so that they could sell it.
All right, I see, okay.
Just
I've
just
never
something
thought
to
about
throw
that
out there and
before.
I
put
haven't either. I haven't either.
Well, so in
at
Kalama,
a large enough grading project.
in
to look at
Kalama,
it
they're
that way.
grading a mountain, they're crushing it all into rock, and it's not, I mean, it's just disappearing in dump trucks.
That's a traditional
No,
mining activity.
No, they're gonna build apartments there when it's done. MSHA hasn't been there for an
So they're not-
inspection.
they're
It's
not-
not a mine.
They're not approved as a mine, but they're crushing all the rock and selling it.
Or taking it to their other projects or whatever the case, or
Okay, yeah.
I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine, or whatever's going on.
And I think, and there are exemptions for crushing operations associated with construction.
On-site stuff,
Projects.
I bet you it doesn't have to go through
Yeah,
the permitting hoops that it would.
and that
Yeah.
seems
And when it changes the
counterintuitive.
face of the landscape that much, you know, and in both
In a
instances,
smaller scale, it's not a worry.
in both instances at this time, the houses were never built on top of Scott Hill. And then the apartments aren't anywhere started at Oak
Yep.
Village.
Yep.
You know, so the face of the landscape has been changed for not, just for the,
Yeah.
anyway, that's a
Interesting thought.
subject to,
So Brian, my thought is maybe we should consider fill and grade standalone permits as a mining activity. That would stop people from wanting to do fill and grade permits prior to development.
Right,
I
by
think-
developing it, if you mine, you have to do a reclamation of it, right? That's required of mining, is you have to bring it back to something.
yeah.
Yeah.
If you're not gonna bring it back to something, then you can't. Weird, I don't know where to draw the line. Food for, interesting concept though.
Yeah.
Well, and then when we consider where's the urban growth boundary gonna go, you know, especially if it goes anywhere up the mountain at all, you know, what could change, what, you know, so.
Okay, I said earlier that I wanted to wrap it up at 9. You guys sounded like you had agreed, to that. Do we have a motion?
A motion to adjourn.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Aye.
Okay. Aye. Motion passed.
9:00.
We'll now close the public meeting at 9:02 PM. Thanks for putting up with me on this, Travis. I'm not as smooth as Tell is. I wanna make sure you get